Corrupt politicians, open borders, surging welfare, inflation, dropping birth rates, a collapsing currency. Does this sound like America? Well, actually, this perfectly describes the state of Rome right before its collapse. In 1905, Spanish philosopher George Santayana said, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." And there couldn't be a more critical time to reflect on what caused one of the most powerful empires in history to collapse into rubble. And joining me today is Dr. Kirk Elliott to discuss all this and more. But before we get started, today's show is brought to you by Rise TV, a Patriot-owned streaming platform. Over at Rise, our mission is to uncover the truth, no matter how dark and difficult, while always holding on to hope. We have a massive content library, an amazing community of Patriots, and you get to hang out with me and my guests for the second half of every show and ask your thoughts and share your ideas. Ask your questions and share your thoughts and ideas. So if you have any specific questions for Kirk, make sure you join us on Rise TV. There's a link for a free trial in the description below. Also, make sure you're following me on Telegram and Truth Social at Man in America. You can also catch every episode as a podcast if you just want to listen. The links to my podcast and the social media are all in the description below. Also, folks, I'm sure a lot of you own your home. Well, the deed to our homes isn't the only document that proves that you own it. The problem is, the deed to our homes is the only document that proves that you own it. The problem is, though, the deeds to all of our homes are online now. So this means a criminal can find your deed, forge your signature, and refile a document just like this as the new owner of your home. Then he can take out loans using your home's equity and leave you in debt. So FBI reports show that real estate fraud is one of the fastest growing cyber crimes in America, and this is already costing Americans massive amounts of money. And unfortunately, you won't know until the collection notices show up on the loans that you yourself never took out. Homeowners insurance doesn't cover you, and neither do common identity theft programs. Home Title Lock is your peace of mind that the deed to your home is protected, where you can protect your home equity and title for just pennies a day. So to learn more, go to hometitlelock.com/Seth and use promo code Seth. Then enter your address for your no obligation home title scan to see if you're already a victim. That's a $100 value for free. So be sure to use the promo code Seth, that's SETH, for your free title scan at hometitlelock.com/Seth. All right, folks, I am very excited for today's show. This is a topic that I've been wanting to cover for a long time because if I look at where we're at in history, it feels like that we're somehow at the end of a cycle, or there's some bigger picture to what's happening here. And if you know me, I never like staying within the minutia of things and say, what Nancy Pelosi say today? I'm like, where are we at in their stage of history, right? Like, where are we at biblically? Where are we at in the grand scheme of things? And I found the perfect guest to have on to discuss this. So let me go ahead and bring on Dr. Kirk Elliott to the show. So Dr. Kirk Elliott, thank you so very, very much for joining me today.
My word, Seth, it's awesome to be with you. Thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely. So, before we dive into this, you are a double PhD. And so I know that you work in finance and precious metals, but you also have a big background in theology. So can you just give us a little bit of a background of just yourself? Because I feel like that this alone qualifies you to be having this discussion.
Yeah. Okay. So to go way back, I got my master's in international economics, and then I got a job as a wealth manager. I was a stockbroker, right? This was back in the late 90s. This was a long time ago, which was why I have a gray beard, right? So did that, and at the time I was telling some of my clients, even way back then, put 2 or 3% of your portfolio into precious metals as a hedge against some of your stuff. Well, they didn't like that. The big companies, I worked for a company called ING, kind of like the European version of Merrill Lynch, right? And they didn't like it. They said, "You're selling away." It's like, I'm not selling anything. I'm just telling clients to do the right thing, right? That's not selling. I'm not making money on it. Well, they said cease and desist. So here's the thing about me. It's like, I will always do what's right for the client. but I'll also have to honor the company that I'm working for. And the two couldn't coexist together. So I quit, right? And then I had to go home and tell my wife, it's like, hey, guess what I did? And so anyways, I went to start to work for a metals dealer way back in the day. And when I got there, I was supposed to inherit a book of business, and the book that I inherited was the phone book. So they laid it on my desk, and it's like 250 phone calls a day for the first 3 years. It was brutal. It was just brutal. So I'm watching TV. There's a point to this story, right? And Jim Cramer's on CNBC just yelling and screaming, and people are listening to him because he's on TV. So I thought, how can I get on TV? So I'm thinking, there's nobody on TV that has a PhD except for like Harvard nerds talking about policy and putting everybody to sleep. It's like, I'm a little more entertaining than that. So it took me 7 years, but I got my first one in public policy and administration. And I developed a new methodology for measuring inflation, because what the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Treasury and the Fed uses, it's broken. It's just doesn't even come close to the reality of true inflation. So then, because two is better than one, and I'm a glutton for punishment, I decided to get a second PhD in theology. And so how do those two blend? Well, in hindsight, perfectly well, because it defines who I am as a person and what our company is all about, which is people over profit, right? If every company on the planet would view this philosophy as their mainstay for who they are, you wouldn't have the world that we're living in. Because here's the thing, Seth, if you focus on people, profit will come. If you ever start focusing on profit, people will leave, right? So that's how you can have a perfect marriage between theology and economics and make it the synergy of that greater than the individual parts.
Absolutely. I certainly agree. It reminded me, so I, in an earlier life, worked with the Epoch Times. This was a long time ago, and they're just starting out. And I was also doing cold calls. I was selling newspaper advertising, this little newspaper that no one had heard of in New York City, of all places. And cold calling is brutal. So anybody that's done cold calling, it's like, I have a lot of respect. So, Kirk, as I was researching you, we had talked, and I noticed that you had done this lecture series on the fall of Rome. And, when I've, in my own research, really dug into what caused the collapse of Rome, it was almost like the elites, I hate calling them the elites, but the corrupt Luciferians at the top, whatever you want to call them, Satan's minions. It's almost as if they looked at the fall of Rome, the collapse of Rome, and they said, okay, let's figure out how to apply these exact same principles to America. And it was shocking. It was shocking. It's almost like it's the same bloodlines, the same families that made Rome collapse, and now they've passed down these traditions to do it to America. And you had done an entire lecture series on the fall of Rome. I thought, this is perfect. This is exactly what I want to talk about. And I want to just frame the conversation a little bit for the folks that are watching, that this isn't necessarily a doom and gloom scenario. Like, that's the thing, is like the Romans, they didn't have a lesson in the history books to reference to say, okay, here's how we can avoid this. They were really flying blind, but we have history, right? We have a lot to look at. So let's dive in, in your understanding and your study of Rome, what are some of the key things that were happening in Rome that really led to a collapse of one of the most powerful empires on earth?
Well, I think, okay, so first of all, they lost their soul, right? And I mean, this is whenever no people who have ever lost their character have kept their liberties, right? Ever. You can go look throughout all of history. Once you lose the character, you're going to lose the liberties that follow, because public policy follows your heart, right? And that's how the nations start to erode. So, and then you had bad politicians, right? So you lose your character, you lose your liberties, and you have bad politicians. So let's look. Have you ever, Seth, heard of a guy named Clodius?
Only like a brief memory of Clodius, but I can't say that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, so that's better than what most people would actually say. Clodius, who? What? Who's Clodius? He's probably the most influential politician of all time, and nobody's ever heard of him, right? So he was around 92 to 52 BC, something like that. So what did he do that's actually something he did is still mimicked today? And this was one of the things that caused the fall of Rome. And you would think that more people would know this guy's name if what he did was truly that impactful. That's 2,000 years later, they're still copying it. Well, he was running for the office of tribunal, which is like a governor, right? And he really wanted to get elected. And back then, he came up with this novel idea. He said, hey, how about if I give people free grain in exchange for your vote, right? That's what he did. And so to this day, whether it's free cell phones, free healthcare, free this, free that, politicians still mimic what he did because he got elected, right? So free grain for votes, that was one of the things that started to erode the Roman Republic, because ultimately what happened was they didn't collapse because of external forces. They collapsed from within. Right, the weight of their entitlement system, actually, the heaviness of their bureaucracy, and the legions of people who were acting like parasites, just taking, right? This is what caused Rome, but that started with an absence of character, and all of a sudden, somebody who offered them something free in exchange for votes was better than actually working for a living, right? So people learned back then that it was actually more lucrative to vote than it was to work, right? They figured that out way back then. And
where's America at statistically right now?
Okay, this is creepy. You're not going to like the answer, no, nor is any of your viewers. So Rome fell. Actually, they fell when 1/3 of the population of Rome was getting entitlements of some sort. It's some kind of government assistance. Where do you think we are, Seth? Just a question. Where do you think we are in America? Do you think we're greater than 1/3 or less than 1/3?
Unfortunately, I've researched this a lot. So if I hadn't already researched this heavily to understand more precisely, say rewind a couple of years, I would have maybe guessed that 15% of America is on welfare.
Okay. So I never want anybody to take my word for anything, right? So I'll lay out the reference here. If you go to whitehouse.gov, pull up the federal budget, go to summary table S4 in the federal budget, it actually lays out the budget of the United States, the expenditures and the revenue, right? So if you add up Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and other mandatory programs, which would be like women, infant, children programs, food stamps, things of that nature, that comes to $4.02 trillion.
As the annual expense of all that combined?
Annual expense in 2022 of just that. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. See, Social Security is not an entitlement. It's a mandatory payment that you try to take that away, you've got a mutiny on your hands, right? So they can't really get rid of it, right? But so that's 4.02 trillion. How much do we bring in federal tax revenues in a given year, from everyone paying their taxes? 4.17 trillion. So Rome fell when 1/3 of the population was getting. We're now at 96% of everything that we bring in as a nation goes out towards those few things: Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and women, infant, children programs, other mandatory payments, right? What about defense? What about education? What about infrastructure? What about everything else? Can you run the rest of the country on the 4% that's left? No, it's impossible.
So basically, for every dollar that comes into the government, they're giving out 96 cents to people, and those people that receive it, it doesn't matter whether they work, contribute to society, or anything like that. It's just passing right back into the people.
Just passing right back in. So keep that number in mind. 4.17 is what we bring in. 4.02 is the mandatory payments and entitlements. Now, add to that the interest payments on our national debt. Okay. because that doesn't go away either. Our national debt's pushing 31 trillion at an average interest rate of about 2.18%, which is what they are actually paying. The federal government is paying the Federal Reserve to create money out of thin air and actually just loan it back to the government. It's the biggest Ponzi scheme of all time.
It's what they call Babylonian money magic, right?
It's just so terrible. But today, that's $305 billion a year at some of the lowest interest rates in the history of our country. So imagine this. This is at 2.18%. Let's say that interest rates go to 4%. Okay, that's not a 2% increase. That means that 305 turns into 610 billion. What if it goes to 6%? Well,
it's
now we're
doubling and tripling.
920 billion. If we get to 8%, we're at 1.2 trillion. Just, I mean, we get back. Most of your viewers might remember back in 1983, if you were to buy a home back then, the interest rate on a 30-year mortgage was 18%. 18%, right? Imagine that today. Well, I believe that we are going to get there because you've got to slow down this inflation train, right? So at 18%, though, just the interest-only payments is more than the $4.2 trillion that you'd be bringing in just in interest only, let alone all the entitlements, everything else, right? So here's where we are following that parallel of the fall of Rome, when only 1/3 of the government crushed their republic.
So
We've
I
got
have,
96%.
I have a question for you, and this might be a little more conspiratorial, but that's usually what I'm asking those kinds of questions. So a lot of people, they look at Joe Biden or Pelosi or the Democrats in general, and you can see that there's this massive push for a welfare state. And for most people, they think, well, of course, they want to solidify their voter base. They want to bring in the illegal immigrants. They want them to vote. They want to get them on government programs. It's all about securing the vote. But these people, though it looks like sometimes they're running on very low IQ. Biden, it's arguable what's happening with him cognitively, and he's not making these policies anyway. He's just a puppet. But they have to know what the end result of this is. And right. That's the question. It's easy to look and say, oh, they want to secure more votes. But do you think that looking at what happened with Rome, I'm sure there's other instances in history where this has happened, do you think that the end goal of building a welfare state is because they know it's going to collapse our country and that's what they want?
Yeah, I actually do. I don't even think that's a conspiracy theory, just a theory, right? I there's no conspiracy behind it because nobody can be that stupid. I don't think that they're stupid. People ask me this all the time. It's like, oh my word, the Biden administration, they're all so stupid. How can they keep doing this and raising taxes and raising inflation, doing this and that? They're not stupid. They're just evil.
Yeah. Right? I think they're actually very smart, but they're very evil.
Yeah. They just have a different goal, a different agenda. The agenda is more about, not about financial freedom. It's about people control, right? So if you can get people, if you can give them things, going back to Clodius, right, in the Roman Republic, if you can get people in your back pocket and make them dependent, then your republic, your way of life will ultimately fail. So again, let's look at some data here, some data points. So here's some states where welfare payments are more than a minimum wage job, right? So if you actually go get a part-time job, you lose your welfare payment. You have to be fully unemployed to get these welfare payments. In Hawaii, you can make $60,590 a year by being unemployed. So sitting on a beach, drinking a Mai Tai, doing whatever you're going to do, right? DC, $50,820. Massachusetts, $50,540. Connecticut, $44,000. New York, $44,000. See, this is more than a minimum wage job. Why? In a nation where we're starting to lose our soul or have lost our soul, just like the Roman Republic, would you go and work if you can make more by doing nothing? Now, I'm not wired that way. I have to be creative. I have to work. I have to create. I have to think and make a life and make the life better for all those around me, right? That's how I'm wired. But this whole system of, and please don't get me wrong, we need to be, as I'm a believer in Jesus, right? And I give. We are born to give. We live to give, right? Giving to people who are in need should be the job of us as individuals or the church, never of the state, right? And I mean, that's a Band-Aid, not a lifestyle. And this is why we've got the problem that we have right now. And it's very hard to get out of that. It's very difficult to take away something once it's been given, right? And this is the problem. This is why this is going to be a very difficult thing to get out of, outside of a complete collapse and economic failure and reset, pretty much, right? I think things just need to be reset politically, economically, socially, everything, right? So now you look at unemployment, right? So under the Biden administration, during COVID, they were paying people to stay home, right? Rather than creating jobs, which would make sense on growing the economy, they were paying people to stay home. So what if I were to ask you this question? What if everybody in the state of West Virginia was unemployed? What would you say? It's like,
I'd say it's a disaster for West Virginia.
A disaster. Yeah. Everybody, every man, woman, and child in the state of West Virginia is unemployed. You would get, oh my word, something's got to be fixed, right? Well, here's the reality. So in America today, 12.38 million people are on disability. This is really ugly math. They're not working, right? So not by their own choice, but they're not working. There's 11.62 million on unemployment. So that's 12.38 plus 11.6 million. That's 24 million people that are unemployed right now in America. So that's the equivalent of every man, woman, and child in Wyoming, Vermont, District of Columbia, North Dakota, South Dakota, Alaska, Delaware, Montana, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Maine, Hawaii, Idaho, West Virginia, Nebraska, New Mexico, Nevada, Mississippi, and Kansas. Every man, woman, and child. See, and they're paying them to actually not work. See, when we're talking about the Roman Republic falling, and how could America follow in those same fateful steps, right? It's because we are. It's because of bad public policy. It's because we've gone down this path of where it's more lucrative to vote rather than work sometimes. And this is the problem that we're starting to see in America. And when you look at the budget, and you've got wars in Russia and Ukraine, you've got China and Taiwan coming up, and we only have 4% left in our budget, the outside of the entitlements to pay for any of that stuff, it's doomed to collapse. And so you ask the question, kind of a conspiratorial question, do they want this to happen? Yeah, I believe they do. In a globalist world where you can control people, you will always maintain your power, but that strips away your financial freedom. But what it also strips away is, and all of these freedoms are tied together at the hip, right? You would lose your religious freedom, your personal freedom, your economic freedom, your health freedom. I didn't even know health freedom was a freedom 2 years ago, but it is.
Yeah.
Right? Freedom of speech. All your freedoms are tied together. But if you lose one of them, you lose all of them, which is why it's my mission to help people be financially free. Because even though some of our freedoms are eroding, your finances don't need to erode with it. This is my mission in life, right? So here's where we're heading down this path. But
well, I have a question. I'm going to jump in real quick.
Yeah.
So if you look at that, it's okay. So let's say roughly $4 trillion to run just that part of the country, and say we're making an extra 100 billion, right on top of that before whatever. So where's the extra money come from? Is this why we're seeing the Fed's printed over, say, is it $30 trillion now it's up to? I mean, so is it basically they have this defunct, it's almost like they have a defunct business that's running, it's called America. But they also are playing Monopoly, and they're the banker. So is it that they just keep printing and shoving money into it to hide all of these problems? And if that's the case, is that why we're seeing the dollar so strong right now? And where does that lead? Because I remember I was watching Edward Dowd recently talking about the dollar failing up, and this is an interesting concept. So what's the what's the end result of this? It seems like it's not sustainable.
Well, it's not sustainable. And Dowd talking about the dollar failing up. So we have to understand that the dollar isn't strong. When you have this much debt, this few people working, the high taxes, the high inflationary pressures, that doesn't make for a strong currency, right? But it's relatively strong compared to everybody else, right? So we're seeing China, for example, completely implode right now. And I talked about this last year on some different shows and interviews. And when Evergrande, remember when Evergrande, the big Chinese real estate holding company, started to default on its interest-only payments? This isn't like you or me missing a credit card payment. These interest-only payments were $100 to $500 million a month, and it impacted banks all over the globe. So this started last year, like in October, November timeframe, and 100 million there, 500 million. And what I talked about, this will have an impact because all policy, ultimately, you can see the fruit on the tree about 6 to 9 months after the policy, right? So this is all happening now in China. Banks are failing. They have no money. They're telling Chinese citizens, hey, you can't get your money out, right? Your deposits, yeah, they were there, but we don't have it. You can't get it. So now there's riots and protests and looting and everything else, right? And so what we have to realize with that is social upheaval always follows economic collapse and economic failure, always, 100% of the time. You look at what happened in the Arab Spring. Remember that back then? So what happened there? It was foodflation. They started to run out of food, economic collapse. People were hungry, and being hangry is a real thing, right? That caused the Arab Spring, which caused all kinds of mayhem and terrorist attacks globally, right? In France and Italy here. And so now we've got economic failure in America, which you've talked about a lot on your shows. You've talked about the rising interest rates, the inflationary pressures, the housing market collapsing. I think that the pin that's going to burst this global debt bubble is going to be real estate. It was in China. It's going to be the same thing here. Because how in the world could you have, in the last 5 months, quarter point interest rate hike, then 50 basis points, half, and then three quarters, right? That's just been the last 5 months. We still have another 4 to 6 more rate increases that the Fed already said we were going to have. See, at some point you hit critical mass. Now the housing market bursts, and governments don't want to have people, especially during an election year, they don't want to have them without a house. See, because here's one of the ugliest numbers that I've seen in the last few weeks was estimated. I read this research article 2 weeks ago. It's estimated that over the next 90 days, Bank of America alone has over 1 million adjustable rate mortgages that come due. 1 million. See, in January of this year, interest rates on a 30-year mortgage are 3.22%. Now they're 6.75. It's double, right? So imagine 1 million homeowners on adjustable rate mortgages. The reason you get an adjustable rate mortgage is because you probably can't afford the fixed rate one, right? So they're going to double. When they have to refinance over the next 90 days, most of them aren't going to be able to qualify because banks are running out of money. Interest rates are so high, and there's not many jobs right now. This is just Bank of America. Add to that Wells Fargo, the largest lender in America, Bank of America, Citibank, Chase, HSBC, US Bank. See, when you've got all these people that won't be able to requalify for the house, what are they going to do? Right? You're going to have social upheaval. And so this is where the government can step in and say, look, election year, how about if we offer you some loan forgiveness in exchange for the vote? Going back to Clodius, right? We already saw this a month ago with student loans, a lot of them being forgiven as kids spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in college, and then they graduate, and it's like under Biden's economic plan for America, there's no jobs. And so it's like, hey, sorry, there's no jobs, but how about if we do some loan forgiveness on your student debt? Oh, it's an election year. How about we vote for him because we're going to keep getting more stuff? See, this is how politics work, right? And I think that the housing market, that is going to be the pin that bursts that bubble that really starts, sadly, to accelerate us down this path where Rome went, right? And so there's this cycle. As an economist, I love to look at cycles. I love to look at trends. And there's books about this stuff, about social theory, like The Fourth Turning that you and I had talked about, Neil Howe's book. Amazing. It's an amazing prophetic journey. And it wasn't meant to be. He's a sociologist, but he talked about what we're living in today, 20 something years ago when he wrote it. Or actually, it was no more than that. I think it was like 30 or 40 years ago. It was a long time ago, right? But here's the cycle of democracy. Okay. I know democracy is kind of a nasty word, but view it as a republic, the cycle of our republic. This was commonly attributed to a Scottish philosopher named Alexander Tytler back in the 1700s. So every republic goes through this cycle, okay? From bondage to spiritual faith, from spiritual faith to great courage, from courage to liberty, liberty to abundance, abundance to complacency, complacency to apathy, apathy to dependence, and then dependence back into bondage, right? So so let's look at America, right? How did we start as a nation? Well, we fled for religious freedom, right? Ancestors all came over from Europe that was bondage to spiritual faith. That spiritual faith led to great courage. We fought the Revolutionary War. We won. That gave us liberty. And then with liberty, when we could work and we could be free and work for ourselves, right? That led to abundance. But you get too much abundance, you start to get complacent, kind of fat and happy, and you just start, my wallet's looking good, I don't really care, we'll just spend more than what we should, and we're just going to relax and have fun. Well, then that leads to complacency, the complacency to apathy, completely giving up. Then when you give up, you stop working, that leads to dependence again. Once you get to the dependency stage, you go back into bondage. This is America, right? And I would say we're in that dependency state back into bondage. How do I know that? Because of the federal budget says that we are. When you've got all those entitled, 96% of everything we bring in goes in toward an entitlement or mandatory payment, we are going head first back into a time of bondage as a nation, unless you can free yourselves financially and start to fix that. But to do that, you have to actually regain your soul, regain your character, right? And that's the problem that we have in America right now.
Yeah, and it makes perfect sense. I mean, the founding fathers knew we had to wear the armor of God to protect ourselves, to protect our nation, protect ourselves from tyranny. And at their time, tyranny was the British Crown. Now we're looking at what is tyranny. It's this satanic Luciferian and communism coming out of the Far East. I mean, it's evil and it's dark and it's soul consuming. But what's encouraging though is I am seeing a lot of people putting that armor of God back on, which is really good, because I couldn't agree more that I think that where we're at right now is a direct reflection of our morality. And you look at whether it's the Drag Queen Story Hour or anything, turn on Netflix, cannibalism, bestiality, homosexuality. It's all the things that are just, that they've been brought to the forefront of our culture. And, another thing looking back at Rome is that, looking at those cycles of democracy, I wonder where the bread and circuses came in. Because that was a big part of what caused Rome to fall, is that the average citizen, they thought, well, look, I'll go get free entertainment that's very debased and extremely immoral entertainment. That's exactly what we've got. Hey, Netflix, $10 a month, perfect. I can watch, the new show about cannibalism or the mind of a serial killer or some guy that runs a meth lab, right? You have the entertainment and you have the free bread, you have the free food, which my guess is that what that does is it causes people to this become, they stop caring. They get comfortable, they stop caring, they become apathetic. We can't affect it anyway. And it leads them straight back into bondage. But what I see simultaneously, though, is that there's people that are really waking up from that and they're recognizing it and they're saying, I'm canceling my Netflix. I'm getting an extra job. I'm starting my own business. I'm quitting my job that has forced vaccine mandates or whatever. There's a huge movement of people away from that. But one thing that I wanted to kind of dig in with you is if you look at, there's the Henry Kissinger quote, and I might butcher it a little bit, but it's something to the effect of, if you control the food, you control a nation, you control the energy, you control a continent, and if you control money, you control the world. And I know that with how Rome fell, a big part of it was actually that they removed their currency from a precious metal standard. They actually got to a point where then they could, because the only reason our government right now can print these trillions and trillions of dollars is because it's no longer tied to anything. So can you explain to me what happened in Rome with them removing their currency from a precious metal backed standard, how that led to hyperinflation and then the collapse, and how you see that being mirrored across what's happening in America?
Yeah, so their coinage of the day was like a silver coin called the denarius. So when all of this stuff started to become more expensive because the government, it's like they had to increase their taxes, right? They had to increase their taxes to pay for all this stuff when 1/3 of the population was getting something. It's like money just doesn't grow on trees, right? So what people started to do was, back then they would have scales, right? They would weigh it. So they would start to shave the edges off of these coins. And so in time, it's like, imagine it's like a copy of a copy, right? It starts to get more blurry over time. But they had these coins that, let's just say it was the size of a silver dollar. Well, over time, it's like, well, now it's the size of a $50. Now it's the size of a quarter. It's like, at some point, the game is exposed, right? It's like you did it too much, right? So this is what started to happen. And so they started to then not use the actual metals because people were shaving it off because you could melt it down and make it into something else. So they went to just not a tangible species backing the currency, right? Well, that's when inflation starts to really ensue, because you lose all discretion, you lose all accountability towards that currency, and you debase it, right? So let's look fast forward, not yet to today, but let's look after World War I. Germany, the Weimar Republic hyperinflation, right? Classic story. Germany was the big kid on the block. They were like America today. They had a vibrant arts district. Their stock market was booming. They had a huge military. They bombed the living daylights out of most of the world during World War I, and they thought that they won. Well, then international treaty, the Treaty of Versailles, said, hey, Germany, you got to pay back your war debts. It's like, wait a second, I thought we won this thing. It's like, no, you got to pay back, right? Rebuild the countries that you destroyed. Well, they said, we can't do that. So they had their currency was the Rentenmark at the time. And they basically said, fine, it was backed by gold. Said, we'll abandon all the gold backing to it so they can just print without discretion, right? So again, remember what we said earlier on, how social upheaval always follows economic chaos, because this is important. So people, they started printing to fund this international treaty that said they had to pay it back. Mommies and daddies couldn't afford to feed their babies anymore because inflation got to such a point where they had to be paid twice a day in wheelbarrows full of cash, or else the loaf of bread would double from lunch to dinner time, right? People would be mugged, with their suitcases full of cash, leave the cash on the street and take the suitcase because it was the only thing that made any sense. So when mommies and daddies couldn't feed their babies, here's the sad part about human nature, is that we will willingly give up our freedoms in exchange for not even real peace, but perceived peace, right? So what happened after that? Hitler came to the dance, he came to the party, and he said, hey, Germans, if you vote for me, I'm going to fix this, right? And he campaigned on a campaign promise of hope and change. No joke. It's like, that was Obama's words, right? So he campaigned on hope and change, and people voted for him. One of the worst dictators in the history of the world didn't have to hold a gun to people's head to get elected. They willingly voted him in because economically things were so bad, and they will willingly give up their freedoms in exchange for perceived security, right? Fast forward to Venezuela today, right? 20-30 years ago, they were the 4th largest economy in the world with all their oil. Now they have 1,000,000% inflation a year because of communist control and rule and getting rid of free markets and things of that nature. So now people are trading back and forth, gold, silver, beads, vodka, cigarettes, anything just to survive, right? Because their currency is meaningless. So now come to America. We don't have a denarius where we're, chipping off little slivers of silver. But we got rid of the gold standard back in the early 1900s with the Federal Reserve Act. Then Nixon closed the gold window in 1971 for international settlements. And people people give Nixon a bad rap, right? This is just my little history lesson. It's like he created the massive inflation that we have today because he completely closed the gold window. I don't think he was such a bad guy in doing that, because at the time, countries could say, hey, we want gold instead of your stinking US dollars in exchange. And France wanted to be paid back. And he said, you know what, France, I'm not getting rid of the gold. We're closing that gold window. You're going to take our worthless dollars in exchange. So seemed like a good idea at the time, right, to keep the gold. But what that did is it opened up the window of inflation. In hindsight, a horrible decision, right? Because now there's consequences to our actions, both good and bad, right? So now we have this inflation machine, $30 trillion worth of federal debt. To put this into perspective, how this is spiraling out of control, 1776, we became a nation, right? Our national debt was zero on that day. Go all the way to 2011. Obama was president. Our national debt had mushroom clouded to $11 trillion. From the time in 2010, $11 trillion to now. So what is that? 12 years later, it's gone from 11 trillion to 30 trillion, where it took 230 something years to go from 0 to 11. We've now gone from 11 to 30 in 12 years.
It's like one of those charts. It's almost a flat line and it just goes vertical.
Yeah. And it is. It's like going hyperbolic. It's just going straight up. And see, these kind of things are unsustainable. And a lot of that can be attributed to Nixon closing the gold window, having no tangible backing whatsoever. But really, it goes back to the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, because when you look at what did $20 buy you back in the early 1900s? Well, it was actually 1 ounce of gold. Your old gold coins say $20 face value on them, right?
Yeah, I've got some of the old ones.
What would it buy you? It would buy you a finely tailored men's suit, a shirt, a tie, a belt, and shoes. That's what the $20 or 1 ounce of gold would buy you. You could go to the bank, you go to Sears, Woolworths, whatever was around back then, right? But fast forward to today, $20, try to go to Applebee's. You can't for $20.
No.
But 1 ounce of gold at over $1,700 an ounce still gets you a finely tailored men's suit, a shirt, a tie, a belt, and shoes. It maintained its purchasing power over time. See, this is the erosion of inflation. It's the biggest hidden tax ever, is the inflationary pressures, and they know it. See, it's like this. If somebody were to come up to you, Seth, and steal, if you had $100 and they said, I'm taking $98 out, you get mad and you punch them in the nose and say, that's my money. You can't keep your paws off my back pocket, right? But that's exactly what's happened over the last 100 years. But it's like the frog in the boiling pot of water. Nobody realizes it because they've been it with inflation, masking it with exporting of jobs overseas to get cheap Chinese stuff, right? This is what the Bushes and the Clintons and Obamas and they all did is they exchanged jobs for cheap stuff to mask inflation, right? So why pay $30 for a Barbie doll made in America when you could pay $7 for one made in China, right? So it masked what they were doing in the banking system. So people didn't really realize how bad it was. But here's the problem. This is what Trump ran on. Make America great again. How does he do that? By bringing jobs back to America. How do you do that? Bring manufacturing back. See, jobs always follow manufacturing. And here's the consumerist globalist presidents prior to that were buying cheap stuff from China and India and Malaysia and everywhere else. What were they exporting? Jobs, right? and jobs follow manufacturing. So Trump wanted to bring manufacturing back to America, bring jobs back. See, this is where the strong dollar thing, because we talked about this relatively strong dollar. So what does a strong dollar do? A strong dollar means that everything that we bring in to America is going to be cheaper because our currency is stronger. It makes imports coming in less expensive. So that's, people would say, ooh, this is a good thing, right? This is what Biden's trying to do, is bring back that system prior to Trump saying we're masking inflation. Strong dollar, because 70% of everything we consume is still an import, right? But during Trump's years, we actually had a weaker dollar. So a weaker dollar doesn't mean weak America. It means that our currency is weaker. It makes foreign goods coming in more expensive, which is what we want. We want people buying our stuff, but it makes our goods cheaper all over the world. Right? So because their currency is stronger relative to ours, it takes less of their currency to buy American goods. That's how you bring jobs back. It's not with a strong dollar. This is a fallacy. Strong currency doesn't mean strong America.
So it's like what Edward Dowd was saying, is that now I understand a lot better that how the dollar can fail up, how actually going up is a bad thing. And so, I mean, from my perspective, and again, the research I've gathered, from yourself or Andy Schechtman or, the various folks that I watch and listen to, and, Zero Hedge, great website. It seems like everything is pointing towards the US dollar entering into hyperinflation, which would lead to collapse. And that's not even getting into the whole discussion about a competing global reserve currency with the BRICS nations. I mean, that's not even talking about what happens if we lose the petrodollar status. I mean, it just seems like it's a perfect storm for this. And so, again, looking back, we can see the same thing that happened in Rome. You and I, we can see all these signs. So I'm curious, what are the elites doing? Are the elites putting more money into the stock market? Like, what's happening with the money of the elites? Because again, it's like, do as I say, not as I do. It's like, I don't want to do what the talking head on MSNBC Money says. I want to do, like, what's Jacob the Rothschild doing with his money, right? Because that guy probably knows what's coming down the pipeline.
He probably knows. And so a lot of the billionaires and people make fun of them, but they're good business people. You wouldn't be billionaires if you weren't, right? So what is like Elon Musk doing? Well, he's laying off 10% of his workforce at Tesla. Why? Oil and gas are going through the roof. Wouldn't you think that a Tesla car, an electric car, would be in huge demand? Well, sure, if people could afford them. Yeah. They can't afford them, right? So he's smart, and so you've got other So Schechtman, he did some research, and I loved what he put together, because he was looking at the COMEX deposit. COMEX is where all the metals are stored in the country, right? It's
so COMEX. I'm correct in saying that COMEX is the commodity exchange, right? It's out of Chicago. It tracks the exchange of the prices of milk, wheat, but also silver, gold. Is that a correct understanding?
Right. Yes. Yeah. So the depositories where they store metals is a COMEX depository under the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, right? So Schechtman was doing some research on this last week. I mean, this is all pretty fresh stuff. Last week, in one day, 41% of all the kilobars of gold left the building in one day. Somebody bought them. Well, here's the thing. These aren't sovereigns. These aren't countries buying kilobars. Countries buy 400-ounce good delivery bars, 100-ounce good delivery bars. These are like sovereign wealth funds, family foundations, wealthy billionaires, and private investors that are now waking up. See, at the beginning of this video, you said people are starting to wake up. Proof in the pudding. People are starting to wake up, because that's not something that a country would buy. They buy larger bars. So this is just wealthy people that are always seem to be one step ahead of everybody else, right? And then you've got commoners like you and me who say, okay, I don't want to be late to the dance every time. This is why I'm shouting it from the rooftops. Let's not be late to this dance, right? Because this is what they're doing. Now, let's look at silver, okay? Silver is very interesting right now, because there's 2 billion ounces of silver mined every year globally in the mines. 1.2 billion is already committed for in manufacturing demand. That leaves 800 million ounces of silver left for global investors everywhere, right? That's not an awful lot. But when you've got supply chain disruptions and you've got low supply, high demand, prices are going to go through the roof. So if you look at the commodities exchange, the COMEX depositories, what we're seeing here is an awakening. It's people repatriating their metals and allocating into them and getting out of toxic paper assets. Now, so this is what the wealthy people are doing. So at current levels, there's 55 million ounces of silver left in the COMEX depositories. At the current drawdown rate, people buying, this is going to be a huge thing down the road, right? And we can go into this later, but what happens when things start to run out, and when does that time come? You know, we can talk about this in further detail because this is what I do. But the point is, big money is taking possession in metals. This is how they're protecting themselves. But why? We always have to ask ourselves the big why question, is because they're seeing the writing on the wall. See, even if you go back to December of 2020, the Federal Reserve and their Board of Minutes, basically their FOMC meeting said, hey, there's 15 banks in America that we need to submit an orderly resolution plan to the U.S. Bankruptcy Court by December of 2021. So that was 9 months ago. So why would they say that in December of 2020? What did they see coming? And who are some of these banks? Northern Trust, which nobody knows about, but it's the biggest one on the list. They do all the custodial accounts for JP Morgan Chase, Capital One, HSBC. So when you dissect words, orderly resolution plan, that means something was unresolved. It means something was disarray, and they wanted there to be an orderly walkaway for the clients. And who was the recipient? U.S. Bankruptcy Court, right? So they saw this back in 2020, the end of the year. And then December of 2021, these 15 banks had to start basically submitting these plans. But in July of 2021, something even weirder started to happen. And there was reverse repo mechanisms done in the market. So a reverse repo means the Fed is taking out cash out of the system and giving the banks worthless treasuries in exchange for it. Why would you pull cash out of the system when people needed it most during COVID and mom and pops were hurting and there was nothing to be lent out? So now, fast forward again to today, banks are running out of capital. Even with what we do as a wealth management advisory firm, right? We've got wires coming in nonstop every single day. Banks are now, 6 months ago, they would say, okay, would you send a wire? Great. No questions asked. We just send a wire. It's your money. Now it's like, we should investigate this for fraud. Do you know the person? What are you going to use the money for? Why is it leaving? We were the wise custodians of your money for decades. Why are you leaving us? This isn't right. We're not going to send your wire. I mean, we've gotten to the point where we've got some banks not even sending wires, and it's the client's money. Shouldn't your checking account, Seth, be the most safe asset that you have? It's not anymore. When banks start running out of money, and they started running out of money because of this reverse repo mechanism, and the Fed took $2.5 trillion of deposits out of the system back in the summer of last year. To what end? We don't know, but there's probably a plan, right? There's a plan to get out of the system as we know it and go into something else, go into digital currency, change the way that banking is done in America and around the globe. This is where I think that we're headed.
And so if that's where we're headed, which I think we're going to get into that in a little bit here, especially the central bank digital currency, what happens to money? Let's say I've got a 401k, or I've got, say, 50 grand in the stock market, or even $10,000 sitting in a savings account, right? What happens to that money in this instance, right? Because I think that for a lot of the audience here, they're wondering, okay, well, that money sitting in my bank account or my 401k, like, that's my retirement. That's paying for the next 10 years of my life. That's paying for my kids' college. It's paying for my grandkids' college. What happens to that money?
It erodes, because when governments can't, when people stop working, people stop spending, we've got high inflation, high taxes, and people are already living at the margin, Seth. And most of America is 1 to 2 missed paychecks away from filing for bankruptcy. So when you raise taxes, it lowers their bottom line. When you raise prices, because of all the relentless, just unrelenting printing of money, that causes inflation, right? So now prices are higher. You have less money to spend because of higher taxation. That causes stocks to come down, right? Because stock market is one thing only. It's a function of revenues. When people spend, corporate revenues and earnings go up and stock prices go up. This is why we've seen the stock market come down over 30% year to date, because people aren't spending money anymore, right? And we're only at the beginning stages of this. So what happens when, remember when I was talking about inflation earlier, and we're actually at 24.8% right now. If you have cash in your checking account or a CD, people think it's safe, right? You're getting like 0%. That's a guarantee to lose 24.8% a year, because that's what inflation is. That's the erosion of inflation. That's a guarantee, but it's a horrible one. It's not a guarantee you're going to keep your money. It's a guarantee you're going to lose your money. So how do you get out of it? You have to get out of the system, so to speak, not be a digit, not be part of a declining asset. And this is just a general rule of thumb. You don't even have to have 2 PhDs to figure this one out. When something's coming down, get out of it as soon as you can. When something's going up, get into it as soon as you can. But here's where our normalcy bias is generally the killer to our portfolios, because you think, it's never happened to me in the past, therefore it's not going to happen in the present and the future. And my advisor told me, buy and hold for the long term, and you'll be just fine, right?
Actually, I'll share a quick story, Kirk. I saw my dad worked for AT&T, which became Lucent, and around the time of 2000, right, .com crash, I saw him lose his entire 401k. And I remember every day, like he and my mom arguing over it, and she's saying, Ed, pull out the money, pull it out. And he's like, no, it's going to go back up. It's going to go back up. And at that time for him, it went from, say, $80,000 down to basically nothing. And I witnessed it happen, and it was an early memory of mine. I mean, I wasn't an adult yet at that time, and that was what it was. Is the normalcy bias. So the normalcy bias, which tells us that things will eventually go back to normal once they've run their course, but some things don't go back to normal. Rome didn't go back to normal.
I don't think we're going to go back to normal this time. Now, is the stock market higher than it was in 2009 when we had the big correction? Yes. Is it higher than it was in 2000 when you had the tech stocks? Yes. Right. But in 2000, tech stocks came down 80% in 2.5 years. 80. Right. It took people like 8 or 9 years to just break even again. In 2009, it came down over 40%. It took people like 6 to 8 years to break even again. My contention is, don't buying and hold for the long term is stupid. Day trading is also equally as stupid, right? But you've got these trends. And when you understand what causes a trend to be a trend, like what causes stocks and bonds to go up? Well, low taxes, low interest rates, creating jobs. Those 3 things. What causes them to come down? The opposite of those 3 things. Higher taxes and basically people not working, right? Unsustainable debt, political chaos, geopolitical conflict. We have all of those in spades. That's going to cause stocks and bonds to continue to erode. But the rising interest rates to try to slow down the inflation train, which, by the way, isn't going to work. If they want to make interest rates work to slow down inflation, they have to raise them to 25%. Even if they did that, though, my contention is it's still not going to work, because the whole global economy has changed. There's been a structural change, and that is we've gone from complete globalization to deglobalization. As you start to, you're seeing China being kind of like the no China stuff, and putting imports and export controls on everything from Russia and China and everywhere else. Things are starting to be nationalized again. This is why inflation is here to stay for a while. So the question is, how do you protect yourself with inflation? I think Elon Musk had the greatest quote ever. It's like when he was asked like 2 months ago, how do you protect yourself against inflation? He said, I invest in things. Things go up with inflation, right? Gold goes up with inflation. Silver goes up with inflation. Cars do.
Ammo.
Batteries do. Ammo does. Everything goes up with inflation if it's a thing, except for things that are debt-based. So like real estate, it'll go up for a while, but if you have to finance to buy it and banks are running out of liquidity and interest rates are going up and you can't finance it, the price will come down. So real estate is anything that's debt-based, even though it's a thing, ultimately won't do as well as you want in an inflationary world. So you invest into things that are not debt-based. The easiest one to get into would be like silver, because I love it. Why? Because it's an industrial metal as well as a financial metal. It has industrial demand. Do you think, regardless of the price of silver, that Sony, LG, Samsung, Tesla are going to stop manufacturing because the price of silver goes up? No, they're going to pay for it, whatever it costs, so they can stay in business. This is why inflation is here to stay.
And so now, Kirk, we're going to be going over Rise TV soon to continue our discussion, but I wanted to just give you an opportunity just to talk a little bit about your company, because what you do is you specifically have built a company that advises people on wealth management, and you're not one of the vanguard, portfolio managers that says, okay, let's move you into bonds because stocks aren't doing very, very well or whatever. You really, really have built your company primarily based around precious metals. So can you just, if someone, for instance, is thinking, okay, well, this all makes sense now. I've got a lot of money sitting in my 401k or sitting in the stock market. What do I do? Where does your company step into that? Do you have like a free consultation, or what is it that you do?
Free consultation. You see, call our number 720-605-3900, or go to our website, just simply kirkelliottphd.com. And when you go there, you can fill out a form and say, hey, I want to talk to somebody. I want to have a free consultation. And you know what? Tell them that Seth sent me. I want to know what caused you to want to reach out to, because we all have different motives. We all have different dreams, and they're not being fulfilled right now, right? Just say, Seth sent me. That way I'll know the topic of the conversation. But here's what we can do. Reallocate your positions from stocks, bonds, mutual funds into gold or silver. Take advantage of these inflationary trends. You can do that through an IRA. You can do that with just a brokerage account, money in your checking account, right? But the key is physical metals, 1,000-ounce bars of silver, 100-ounce bars, 10-ounce bars, 1-ounce rounds, and low-cost bullion, right? Maximize the number of ounces. So this is why we don't sell stuff on our website, because we're not an e-commerce. There's no way that I can actually advise somebody if I don't know what your dreams and goals are, right? So you call us. I have a ton of schedules. There's like 9 of them. They'll ask you questions. What do you want to protect? And get on with myself or one of my advisors. It's all free. We'll map out a strategy for success for moving forward to get out of the path of this hurricane that's just going to mow people over with the inflationary pressures and high taxation and political conflict, right? The key is tangible assets. And we're focusing on silver right now for real fundamentally strong reasons of supply and demand, historical price levels, because our goal is to minimize risk and maximize return. I don't care if you're in stocks, bonds, mutual funds, gold, silver, whatever, because Seth, I'm a firm believer there is no such thing as a bad investment. They're just bad timing for investments. Every investment that we have is going to grow or shrink because of policies coming out of DC. When you have policies like Reagan and Trump had, lower taxes, lower interest rates, create jobs, the stock market boomed. It's not that I'm against stocks. I'm against them for right now, because we've got the opposite under Biden. We've got higher taxes, higher interest rates, and paying people to stay home and creating inflation because of their printing money like there's no tomorrow. So call us. We'll map out a strategy for success, and we'll walk you through it. We want lifetime relationships with our clients, right? It's not like we're just going to allocate into something and then you forget about you. We're not transactionally based like that. Most firms are, where they make a commission when you come, when you go, and they forget about you in between. To me, those are the necessary evils, those transactions, because life happens in between them. It's the philosophy of our firm of people over profit will hold your hand through this economy, let you know when it's time to buy, sell, reallocate, get out of Dodge, do whatever needs to be done with a worldview set that you and I believe in. We don't follow the mainstream media narrative.
Yeah, and that's, I'll jump in quickly. That's the important point, because I've talked to family before. One of my family members has his entire 401k with Vanguard. And I talked to him. I said, well, what do you think? Because I talk a lot about gold and silver. That's my own personal investment. I've got my 10-ounce bar of silver always sitting on my desk to remind me that it's always here. It's not some number that disappears on a screen. But he goes, well, I talked to my advisor and they said this, and they want to move me into this financial instrument. And the key is that it's like, if you're looking at even whether it's food prep or anything right now, you have to look at it on a geopolitical level. You have to look at it like their financial advisor, his Vanguard advisor, is not looking at, well, what happens if Russia and China bring out their currency? What happens if there's a central bank digital currency? You look at things in that perspective, which I think is absolutely critical. It's critical. It's almost like being a farmer without paying attention to the weather. And like, well, I can sell you these seeds. And it's like, no. Like, there's a storm coming, or we're going to be a drought this year. So don't plant this crop, plant this crop. And that's how I see what you do. So, so your website is Kirk Elliott. That's ELLIOTT.PhD.com. And what was your phone number people can call?
It's 720-605-3900.
Okay. So folks, write that down. We'll give you one more time.
720-605-3900, or the website is simply KirkElliottPhD.com with 2 L's and 2 T's.
It's easy. So Kirk, we're now going to jump into the Q&A portion. And if we would have had a little more time, we could have had this discussion publicly. But before the show, you and I were talking about how there's this deadline. December 13th is when the next step of Biden's digital currency rolls out. And, you, again, especially with a background, a PhD in theology, you went straight to the mark of the beast. And I think that this is something I really want to hear your thoughts on. I would have loved to have it during the first part of the show, but we've kind of run out of time, which I think you and I could talk for hours. I'll have to have you back on again. But so folks that are watching, if you have any questions at all for Kirk, even specific questions like, here's what's happening with my house, and my child needs this, and how does this happen with my trust? Whatever that is, Kirk, I think will be more than happy to answer any questions that you have. But I also then want to first start our discussion over on Rise TV with what you see unfolding with this central bank digital currency and how that ties into the mark of the beast. So folks, thank you for those of you that are joining us on Rumble, Facebook, YouTube, etc. Thank you for being here. If you want to come join us over on Rise TV, there's a free trial. There's a link for a free trial in the description below your video. If you want to stick around, it's $9.99 a month. You're really supporting what we're doing as patriots, trying to get the truth out there. And that's the reason why you see the majority of the content I put out there is on the free platforms. But trust me, YouTube doesn't pay me to put videos on their platforms. Like, trust me, they don't. Also, say you don't want to come join us, but if you still want to help out, please share this video. If you found this video was helpful for you, if it helped you understand a little better about what's happening in the world, email it to 2 friends, text it to your mom. Say, Mom, watch this video. I've been telling you about this stuff for a while. Please watch this video. So, Kirk, before we hop over to Rise TV only, do you have any final thoughts to put out there?
One final thought. Everybody that I talk, everybody's a strong exaggeration, 99.9%. Okay. When they call me, they're gripped with fear. And fear does 2 things. It either paralyzes you to inaction or it causes you to make the wrong decision, right? So I would encourage everybody, if you don't do anything in this economy, you should be fearful. You will sink with the ship, right? So it takes that initial action, that leap of faith to do something about it, to get out of harm's way. I can almost guarantee you, your gut, your heart is telling you something's wrong with the system. Listen to that still small voice and take that leap of faith, because here's the thing. Oh my word. After our consultations that we have with clients, the free ones, and we're talking to our clients and the people that are calling in, you can actually hear a smile. You can hear the smile as the financial anxiety starts to melt off because they realize there is a plan. There is success here for our financial future. That will put a smile on your face and erode the fear that stupid government policies that neither you nor I can control are bringing into people's lives. Don't operate that. You weren't created with a spirit of fear. You're created with sound mind and wisdom and discernment. So we have to use it, and just give our office a call and we'll help you navigate through this together. Hold your hand through it to be in the right place at the right time. The majority of the time, that will put a smile on your face.
And that's important. Smiles are important these days. All right. So Kirk, just read out your phone number one more time, and then we'll hop over to Rise TV.
You bet. It's 720-605-3900.
All right. So great. So folks, we'll see you over on Rise TV for the Q&A and the discussion on the mark of the beast. So Dom, you can go ahead and cut the public streams, and we'll just go ahead and dive right in. So Kirk, before we jump into the questions, I just want to hear just your quick thoughts on the central bank digital currency, what Biden is rolling out for at the global level, their the true central bank currency, and how you think that relates to the mark of the beast. I really want to hear your thoughts on this.
So this goes back to Executive Order 14067 that Biden passed into law in March. It kind of went overlooked, right?